And joining us now is Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary to President Clinton and former Director of the National Economic Council during the Obama administration. Thank you very much for being with us, Larry.
Good to be with you, Andrea.
Well, you've been warning about inflation since last spring. You were one of the early hawks, if you will, and you were apparently critically involved in persuading Senator Manchin to alleviate his concerns that this new reconciliation package is not inflationary, that they are hoping to pass. Tell us what points you were making about that package and about, the future of government spending.
Look, I think we've got a very difficult economic situation, and I'll come back to that. But I think this bill is an important positive bill. It will reduce the deficit over time, and that reduces demand pressure on the economy. It will stimulate energy supply, and that reduces price pressure. It will use government purchasing power more effectively to buy pharmaceuticals, and that too reduces prices. So any way you slice it, I think this bill is anti-inflationary, and at the same time, it's pro-environmental, it's pro-fairness, it's good on climate change, and so I think it's an important step forward. And this plus the CHIPS Act, I think, puts us in a very good situation economically for what is going to be a very difficult period.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a moment, but what would you say to Senator Sinema, who is still undecided, let's say, or keeping her options open? And she's always been concerned about the tax side. What would you say about the carried interest and the tax implications to persuade her?
I would say that taking excess funds shooting around the economy out is anti-inflationary. I would say it's basic fairness that those most successful in private equity should pay taxes at the same rate as the people who clean the floors of their offices. I would say that the future of the planet depends on whether the United States steps up and does concrete things about the environment, and that this is an easy bill to get behind, and that we've gone from a bill that would have raised demand, increased spending, caused inflation, had price tags in the trillions, to a much more appropriate and streamlined bill. And it's time for her to declare victory about a process in which she's been very constructive as part of the discussions, and to vote for the bill. And that I think it would be shattering to economic confidence if at this point this bill did not pass.
That's a very grave premonition as to what would happen, obviously, if it does not pass. So let's talk about the economy, the basic economy. You said it's complicated. Complicated could be a euphemism for it's not going to turn around anytime soon.
Look, Andrea, I think we're getting bad news on inflation, and we're getting bad news on economic strength. The bad news on inflation is coming in the form of the wage and price increase data. The bad news on economic strength is coming on terms of the spending data. And so what that's telling us is, frankly, what I and many others have been saying for a long time, that the Fed and to some extent the administration, but much more the Fed's confidence in a soft landing is tooth fairy kind of stuff. And we need, in my view, to prioritize inflation, because if we don't prioritize inflation, we're going to have higher and higher inflation and a more and more stagflationary situation. And we need to prioritize inflation. But if we do, we're going to very likely have a meaningful economic downturn. I was very surprised by Secretary Yellen's expression of optimism that we could somehow get through this without the unemployment rate rising above 5%. She's a great economist, and that's certainly a possibility. But my best guess would be that 5% unemployment sort of corresponds to neutral in the current post-COVID environment. And so to have inflation come way down, we're going to have to see unemployment get above that. So I think we just have to accept what's necessary as part of the investment process for building the very, very strong economy that we can have in the United States.
And so you would assume it's more likely than not we're going to have a recession if we're not already there.
I think the odds are very high, perhaps over 3/4, that in the next year or two we will have a recession. And I think that's just what happens when you have an economy that is as overheated as our economy was allowed to become.
Well, and of course, there are midterm implications for that. Just a quick question about China, because the president and Xi Jinping had what was described as a marathon call, 2 hours and 17 minutes. And it got very heated in the sense from the Chinese perspective. They said, you know, that those who fan the flames will perish from the flames, or something. I'm paraphrasing to that. But it was a very tough call in the context, of course, of Nancy Pelosi potentially going, if she does go to Taiwan. How important is it to try to get back onto economic competitive terms with China and get away from these military threats?
Look, I think it's more important to talk to your adversaries than it is to talk to your friends. And I was glad to see the call. I was glad to see the possibility of a dialogue between President and President Biden and Premier Xi. I think we've got to try to get this into a more managed place where we're discussing and working through potential disagreements. I think that's a very, very important thing. I certainly think we need to find a line where China is in the wrong on many, many, many issues. And we need to find a way where it's acceptable to suggest that it's counterproductive for the United States to be truculent without that in any way being weakness towards China. And that's really going to be the task of diplomacy going forwards, to be firm without being truculent vis-a-vis China. It does seem to me that we need to recognize that in a world that's changing, we're not going to get everything we want in our relationship with China. And we need to think about what our highest priority issues are. We need to think about a limited number of red lines. And we need to do more of what the United States is always very bad at, which I call strategic empathy, which is, even if we don't like it, even if we think it's badly wrong, even if we think it's offensive, we need to understand how the world looks to our negotiating partners, not simply repeat how it looks to us. And I think there's been a bit too much repetition of our wish lists and a bit too little effort to really understand how the world looks from China's perspective.
Very, very interesting. Larry Summers, thank you so much on all issues.